My name's Pasquale DeMaio. I work at AWS, and my team owns a service called Amazon Connect. It's a SaaS application that uses a lot of AI, so I think there's a great connection there. In fact, with our most recent launch just a few weeks ago, I say Connect is AI because we now include AI in every interaction with every customer on it from start to finish. So literally making the communications with your customers better with AI at every turn. And so I think it's incredibly exciting to be here. I love what you're doing with the conference.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we're going to get into a lot of what you're doing with AI, but before we do that, I think one of the really interesting stories to tell is that AWS Connect or Amazon Connect is one of the fastest growing products that we've seen in a while. You guys reached, from what I saw in the news, you reached 150 million revenue in 4 years. Tell us about that journey. How was that like? How did your team grow? What was that like to scale up so fast?
Yeah, we don't ever talk about revenue externally, but but it has been one of the fastest growing services in AWS history, and it's been quite a journey. The reason I think why it has grown so fast is because it solves a durable human need, which is really engaging with human beings. And so no matter what's happened in history, people have continued to engage with each other. I think that no matter what happens with AI will hopefully continue to be the case. In our case, we're doing it so that organizations, corporations, businesses can be able to talk to their customers. And fundamentally, we want to take that and change the way they do it from being a very reactive process to one that's proactive, solves problems before people know they're happening, uses AI to make it much faster and better, make the human people who are engaged more human so they're freed up to be empathetic and things like that. These are all the things I love about being a human, and so we want to bring that forward for folks. People really reacted well to that. Part of it's because Amazon, I think, is known as a company that cares about customer service, and so that helped us build that foundation. Another part of that was because we had some good technology that some folks who predate me had built that allowed us to use as a basis for that. And I think that looking for those arbitrage opportunities in life where you have something of very high value that you can leverage is always a key to any successful sort of goal.
Yeah. So one of the things I heard you mention there was this thing about how what you're doing is facilitating this human communication. And so obviously I love community. I love building community. I love talking to people. In this kind of like customer service kind of like feedback, what were some of the things that you learned about how companies approach customer service while you were growing Connect?
Well, the first thing I would say is that every company and every situation has a different goal with their customers, and customers have different expectations. When people, when you walk up to a coffee shop, your expectation of how you're going to engage with that's very different than when you buy something on a very inexpensive online store versus if you buy a very expensive product, And even within the same verticals, you expect to have a different experience when you're buying a $15,000 car than if you're buying a $50,000 car. And those things set up some dynamics. And then if you work back from that, my belief has always been that in the end, customers are almost always going to choose great customer service over poor customer service if things are close together. Now, obviously, if they're far apart, they won't. And so that's been the mental model, is that if you can facilitate these things regardless of sort of where you are on the level, if you can allow people to do a little bit better than they did the day before, then people will be able to build a long-term, Kaizen process on top of that to make those experiences better. So when I talk a lot about the communication pieces here, the actual part that's probably the most valuable to my customers is the measurement, which is seeing how they're interacting with their customers, learning from that, and then making changes. And so I think most of you out there running businesses, if you've been running one for a while, you've probably realized sometimes how hard it is to understand and measure your business, and how much value there is when you can actually do it accurately, and you'll find some amazing things. You discover, oh my God, people were using this completely differently than I thought they were. I mean, some of the best, you think of a company like Slack and the massive pivot they had because they realized the way people were using the tool was more interesting than the software that they were actually developing for the external customers initially. I mean, that's a sort of a complete hockey stick, but it's always, I think so much of life is that if you can understand better. And that's the second half of kind of the magic, and the third half, and the part where we're now seeing the next big jump here is as AI has changed in the last year, and the last 3 years really, as GenAI has become the zeitgeist, and I think in 2 years we'll be back to calling it AI again, but I think that's all fine. What we've seen here is it's fundamentally changed people's expectations of how they're going to interact with PCs, and it's changed the people who are delivering customer experiences, expectations of what they think they need to do. And that opening up of the mind actually gives you an opportunity to gain leverage that you wouldn't have had before. If you walked up to someone 3 years ago and said, we're going to have this amazing human-like experience with a computer, they would have kind of been like, okay, maybe.
Yeah.
But now if you said that to people, they're like, yeah, that sounds very reasonable. Let's have that conversation.
Yeah.
And so it changes the whole interaction with those people and what they think they can do, what
Yeah.
the possibilities are.
I'd love to touch on what you're doing with AI and how you're using that to leverage possibilities. But before we do that, you said one of the things you said is that as people use Connect and learn more about it, one of the things that they do is they realize that maybe people are using their products in ways that they wouldn't have expected. Did you come across any of that while you were building Connect? Was there any moments like that for you?
Yeah, I mean, yes, this is one of the most interesting things I discovered is Connect offers communications across many channels, whether that be voice or whether it be chat or SMS, email. What we found is actually that we have a thing called a task, which allows you to just track items of work. And that actually is the most popular use case inside of Amazon.
Oh, no way.
And I thought it was super surprising. I figured, you think about how many people might call or have a chat conversation with us, but in the end, people found so much value in just being able to understand what they were doing and tracking it and improving it, that those analytics and metrics I talked about drove them to use more tasks than they did. We got total voice calls, total chats. A really amazing surprise for me.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so let's pivot back into what everybody's here for, the AI stuff.
Yeah.
And how are you guys using AI to power what you're doing at Connect now? Is there, I know there's a lot of startups that are doing this, and it would be great to know if you're doing this too. Is like, the voice agents. This has been something that has been super popular online over the last month or so. And then maybe any other GenAI use cases that you're touching on.
Yeah, personally, I get very excited about technology, and I love AI, but I don't like technology or AI for its sake.
Right.
I like it for delivering real value. And one of these things is when you have human interactions, it's one of the places where AI can bring the most value. And the thing that a lot of people, I think, get lost in is like, well, we'll fix this one problem or this one challenge, so I want to have a voice bot that can answer some questions.
Yeah.
And that's not the worst thing to say. If you can solve a problem, like if I call up a bank and want my bank balance, I'd probably rather hear it from an automated experience than I would talk to an agent and have them looking at my bank account.
Sure.
In other cases, I would like to have a very real interaction. Maybe the problem is very personal, or maybe it's so complex that I don't think I can explain it to a machine in a way that it would understand. And then I want a person, and then I want that person to be really focused on the conversation and how many times have you called in and heard someone, you can hear them all tabbing, and maybe you don't hear the button presses, but you can hear their brain slow down. You can hear them not focusing on you. And so at every step of the way, you want to bring AI in to improve that experience. So make those first interactions better. So instead of when you call in and saying, hey, how can I help you? Which will leave me and you probably going operator, let me talk to a human being. Instead, say something like, hey, I see your flight was canceled. Can I put you on the next one tonight? And that fundamentally changes the conversation you're having, because now you feel understood, recognize it's a big problem. Maybe it's not why you're calling, or maybe you don't want to do that.
Sure.
But at least you can say, no, I want to do something else. But that changes fundamentally what you're doing. Now, if you take that to the next step and say, okay, let's say that's not why I'm calling at all, and I want to have a very different conversation. Now, at least we've already gotten that out of the way. I learned a little more. I can ask you a question about, well, how can I help? And I could say, hey, I want to do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
That information can then move all the way to the human being on the other side. And that human being can start from a place of knowledge and understanding and start by saying, hey, it sounds like this is what you're trying to achieve. How can I help you? Meanwhile, AI is listening in the background, understanding what the customer has said and what they are saying, and actually telling that person, here's how to help solve that problem.
Yeah, here's how to solve that problem.
Human being still has control to say, no, I don't think that's right, or to act as a filter, but then they can solve the problem. And then we can even automate all those steps, which doesn't really require AI a lot of times.
Sure.
And get the human out of having to sit there and alt-tab, copy and paste, make mistakes. And this is something you can talk about in customer service, which is great, but you can think about in all parts of your life. How much of your life is spent doing repetitive tasks where and how many of that time is wasted? Like I make coffee every morning. Once in a while I screw it up. It really sucks, right? I would like to automate everything I can as long as it doesn't hurt the quality.
Yeah.
And then I get to spend more time drinking the coffee and enjoying it with my wife and less time worrying about messing up the coffee.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you touch on a lot, and this is very, very Amazon, is the customer-centric aspect of things. Do you feel like that is really what has helped you guys grow so quickly?
It was great for us to have that basis. I go and sit every year with agents and listen to their experience and watch them work and learn from it. I did that before I was ever involved in this particular business.
Oh, no way.
I did that, sorry, thank you. Apologies. I did that before I was ever involved in this business. I would go sit in the agents and learn from it. I think there's tremendous knowledge in any business you're in that you should go do that thing. If you work for a rideshare company, I think you should go drive rideshare. If you work, if you work for customer service, you should go engage in customer service. If you work for a company, I've also gone and walked the fulfillment center and done the fulfillment work, and it was hard work, and I learned a lot from that. Every time you go do that and you learn, I think you develop empathy and understanding, but you also learn a lot about yourself and empathy for the situation of the end customer. All these pieces come together to make you, I think, a better person and a more intelligent person.
Yeah, totally agree. So one other thing that we've been hearing a lot about with AI all over the web and in person as well is just how do you feel about the automating of tasks? Is this something that you think we're going to have less people working on certain things? How do you think this is going to affect the workforce?
I think we'll have a lot less people working on boring stuff. I think people will be a lot more fulfilled. If I think about my day-to-day, AI has improved it, and I use it. I sometimes just to proofread some of the things I've written to make sure they're better. That's something that used to take me a long time, and I found it to be very monotonous. Now I can look at it and say, okay, this is a different way I could have said that. I'll ask it to critique things like that. Yeah. I think that's great. I don't ask it to do my job. Okay. I don't say, hey, how should I run this team? How should it go? Hey, write me an email and tell the team this information. I will usually start with myself and then say, how do I make this better?
Right.
I think that's hopefully part of the value I bring as a human leader, and so I stay invested in that.
Yeah. What do you? What AI are you using?
We have internal AI at Amazon we use. We have a tool called Cedric that's based on...
Cedric?
Yeah, which is a lot of fun. And we also are developing a ton of AI externally, and we have great partnerships with folks like Anthropic as well that we do through Bedrock. Thank you for the folks who raised their hand for Bedrock. We appreciate it. I certainly love what they're doing in Bedrock. That's not my team, but I make a lot of use of it in my organization as well. A very cool product.
Okay. Do you have any prompts that you particularly like?
Honestly, usually the most common one I do is make this more concise, say this in a better way, say this, One of the most interesting studies I saw recently was they asked people and LLMs to respond to stuff, and they saw the LLMs actually were more naturally empathetic than the humans were.
Wow.
And I thought that was a really interesting thing, and it scared me maybe a little bit about both.
Yeah.
But I think that, trying to take a step back and think about how you're communicating what the impact on other people are the areas I think about most. My other prompts are sort of long and complex and boring probably for folks to think about, but that's the one I think is most interesting, is how will this be received by the other person? How would they interpret this? I think is an interesting one. People who are great at writing and communicating are thinking about that themselves anyways, but this can help you do that, I think.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so let's move on to the future-looking aspect of things. So you work a lot with AI. Your product uses a lot of AI. Where do you think we're going to be in 2 to 3 years?
So my expectation is that pretty much everyone will be using AI as a core tool within that time frame. Every single thing you do will involve some form of AI helping you to do it.
Yeah.
Even today, you'll be touching things that were helped with that too. And so, I took an Uber here, and it took me a minute to figure out how to open the door because it was a new car and it had a button that was a very odd button. But I figured it out eventually. And I was sort of sitting there thinking, if these are the kind of things we should be learning from, and as you get more augmented experiences for people, that would be something that people recognize. People have problems with its door, and it could have whispered in my ear, hey, the door handle is actually this weird button over here that doesn't look like a button. It's sort of a silly example, but that will be where I think we end up pretty quickly. Folks who, I think the nice thing about a lot of the technology we have now is I think it will be embraced by people of all ages, all cultures. I think it's going to be something that's pretty well accepted. And I think if we use it well and we think I think ethical AI is an incredibly important topic to be discussing, and I don't think we want to turn this into an ethical AI conversation. We'd be here for an hour and a half.
Right,
but I think as we take that approach that we should be helping everybody and we should be doing it in a humane way and in a way that helps humans be better humans, I think that is going to be an incredibly powerful thing. And I actually do believe that will be what happens.
That's awesome.
So I'm very optimistic.
I'm really hoping that is what happens. I also have a very optimistic look on AI, as you guys might guess. Well, thank you for sharing that knowledge. We're going to move into the rapid fire round. So this is more of an interesting aspect. So favorite book that you've read in the last 5 years?
Favorite book in the last 5 years. I read The Remains of the Day, and I wouldn't say it was my favorite book, but it was the one where I felt the most proud to have finished. And then I love to read a ton of nonfiction. So I just read one of Malcolm Gladwell's more recent books that I love those. They challenge your brain. And then I would say if I read fiction, it will usually be something very easy to read. And so usually I'll ask my wife what the best, like really trashy book she's read lately, and I'll read that one. So.
All right. I also asked my wife about that. Okay, if you were a flavor of ice cream, which flavor would you be?
I think I'd probably be pistachio.
Pistachio.
Sort of unusual, interesting flavor. Not for everybody, but the folks who like it a lot.
Okay, very good.
Maybe you're excited when you see it.
Yeah.
'Cause it's
Okay, we have a few minutes left here, so we're going to move into audience questions. Does anyone from the audience have any questions for Pasquale? Morgan has the mic, so if you see anyone with their hand raised, you can go ahead and... Oh, someone's got the mic.
Hi, my name is Ethan. I'm a student currently, but the question I come from... Oh, sorry. But the question I'm thinking about is when it comes to like evaluation metrics with AI. I recently read like a paper on this with a few of my peers, but it was about the point where like the metrics are just how well a model performs on a standardized test might not be the most indicative of a model's success. And additionally, the paper noted out that in order to transition to AGI, maybe the approach of incremental improvements is not the right path to that. What are your thoughts on that? And I'm wondering, like, should we be reapproaching both how we evaluate models and also how we develop them?
I think if I heard the question correctly, you were saying, is incremental improvement the right path, or should we be thinking about how we use models to evaluate differently? I'm going to turn the question on its head a little bit to say that one of the interesting things about this generative AI, I'll say revolution we're in now, which I think will turn out to be more of an evolution by the time it's over, but in a very good way, hopefully, is that if you keep asking it to do the same things over and over again, it will get better, as you said there, but that won't ever change or deal with the things that are more interesting and unexpected. Like the things that really change things in life are the ones where you ask a different question. And so I think to your answer about local maxima, or your implied answer about local maxima, I actually think that's a huge risk for a lot of businesses. Getting to local maxima may be a huge win for folks too. Like, to be clear, if you could just improve gas mileage by a few percentage, you could save you have a huge environmental impact, save people a lot of money, empower people to do more things. So that would be a local maxima that could be great. But if you say to yourself, well, do I really want to have people driving, or could we avoid that altogether? That's the better question to ask a lot of times. And so I think it's going to be, the people in this room are the perfect people to be asking yourselves, what's the right question I should be asking? How should I fundamentally change the question we're asking versus that? In terms of model measurement, there's a lot of scientists who will do a lot better job explaining what the right things to do there than I would. But I hope that we're taking those models and then asking questions that are far more interesting than the questions we asked last year.
Hi. When you look at a customer interaction using AI, are you able to figure out whether that customer had a good experience, like whether the outcome was good? Do you need them to fill out a survey? Or is it sort of, are you able to take cues from their voice or the outcome or things they say to whether their problem was solved or whether they had a positive outcome?
I would say all of the above. So the question was, are you able to use AI to understand the outcome of an experience? Do you want to use surveys? Are there other tools? I would say all those tools have a place. I think the most interesting thing to ask yourself is, do you want to measure the experience, or do you want to measure the long-term value of the customer and the long-term value of your service to them? And how do you figure that out? That question, to me, is the core one. I don't want to end a conversation and say, did the customer buy something or not? That was the win or loss, because maybe they bought something because they really liked the person, but they hated the item and it was the wrong thing. Or maybe the person even lied to them during it. Well, yeah, you made a sale, but did you make a long-term customer? Maybe not. Maybe they now hate your business. Similarly, if the person calls up to cancel something and the person makes them feel guilty about it, they might not cancel that day, but now they'll call back the next day and cancel, and now you made it twice as expensive to let them cancel. And that's not a good outcome for the business either. Instead, I would say take a step back and think about, where do you see the actions and behaviors of the customer following what they do over time, and where does that lead to? And also, could you have actually avoided the whole experience altogether by doing something up front to make that outcome much better for the customer before they ever contacted you? Now, if they're calling to ask you about a product they want to buy, definitely talk to them and let that happen. But if they're calling because something screwed up on the website, detect that and fix it before they ever have to call you. Or if you see something's happened, again, with that, an example I love is when your airplane is delayed in the sky and you're landing and you're like, is my rental car still going to be there? Send a text right away that says, hey, your car's still in H7, no worries, we know your flight was delayed. Now I'm not scrambling around on my phone trying to figure out if I can still get my rental car. Those little things go a long way to both delivering a great outcome for the customer that changes the way they think about your business, and also go a long way to saving money, because I always say customer service that's good is almost always also faster and therefore cheaper. And so all those things kind of go together. But I would, again, think about, what are you measuring? Is it the right thing to measure?
I think we can take one more question. Who has the mic?
Hi, my name is Zamar. A couple of questions, but I'll probably post only one. Lately, what DeepSeek kind of proved is there's going to be a lot of compute efficiency in achieving and building models and even improving the models. Do you see that trend going up and see more enterprises wanting to build personalized LLM models from scratch? Or do you see more vertical integration where more kind of GPUs are becoming a commodity, and that will be bigger and bigger as we go?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and obviously one that's very hard to predict that anything will be a strict rule one way or the other as to whether it'll be more, the improvements in model and performance will cause more horizontal solutions, more custom solutions, or more vertical solutions. I think the answer is a little bit of all of above. I kind of interestingly, I think in the last 2 years, folks were so excited about this that they got funding immediately to go hire scientists and go do stuff. And they said, well, I have an edict to have GenAI working in my enterprise by the end of the year. But they didn't even know what GenAI was. They were just like, I now have to do this. And I used to ask people to raise their hands and say, did your boss send you here to learn about GenAI, when I was giving a GenAI talk? And they'd be like, more than 50% of people raise their hand. And I say, raise your hand, keep your hand up if you think your boss knows what GenAI is. And they put their hands down. And they'd be like, that's probably right. And I think the evolution of this is going to have all of those things. There's going to be places where customization is really important to the experience, and there's always going to be, in every industry, there's people who zig to what the zag is. Like you have, there's hotels that the experience is very hands-on and very welcoming. There's hotels where they say you don't even have to talk to a person. You can just, you can just go there and you'll give you a key before you even arrive. And then there's hotels where the whole hotel is an experience. A bed and breakfast is a great example of the far end of that spectrum, where you're actually going to interact with the people there and know who they are as a human being for the course of the stay. Well, each of those things I think is right for the right person in the right situation. I think we're going to see the same thing with GenAI, which is you're going to have situations where verticals make a ton of sense. You're going to have situations where horizontals make a ton of sense. I do think there'll be less folks in every enterprise working on specific model training and prompt engineering and all this stuff over time, because I think a lot of that stuff will become more of a well-understood and repeatable option versus something where every company is going to somehow differentiate heavily on that. And as you think about that and what you're building, I would say, how can you take some of that lifting off of the plates of the folks in those companies or other locations, and it may be what you're delivering makes it so anybody in that business can then get amazing results with this technology, is probably the right answer. Certainly in Connect, my goal is to make it so business users can make all the changes to the business, and technology folks only need to be involved when the most interesting technology challenges exist. I would highly encourage everyone to think about how GenAI can let you do that and revolutionize a business that you're interested in helping people do better in.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Pasquale. Before we go, I want to do that quick show of hands if your boss sent you here to learn about GenAI. Show of hands if you think your boss knows what GenAI is. All right. I love the very customer-centric mindset. Thank you very much, Pasquale.
Thank you so much. This is great.
Yes.